She stood in their marble palace, wearing a $50 dress, and when they finished laughing at her, she quietly said 5 words that would cost them everything. "I'll see you Monday morning." Welcome back, beautiful family. If you're ready for a story about a woman in a $50 dress who brought down a billionaire empire, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Let's begin. What assumptions have you made about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Jade Morrison pressed her palms against the cool marble of the Ashworth Estates fountain, watching crystal water cascade under soft golden lights. The $50 black dress from Target felt appropriate now, not because she couldn't afford better, but because she'd learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful move was to let people underestimate you completely. The invitation had been a mistake. She knew it the moment she'd received it, elegant cream cardstock with gold embossing. The Ashworth family cordially invites you to celebrate Jonathan's 25th birthday. Her assistant had probably been added to some charity donor list after Jade's foundation had quietly funded a children's hospital wing. The Ashworths wouldn't know Jade Morrison from any other +1 wandering their glittering Manhattan penthouse. Perfect. She'd spent 3 years building toward this moment, ever since she'd discovered which family owned the investment firm that had rejected her startup pitch with the words, "Perhaps something more suitable to your background, Miss Morrison." The partner's smile had been winter cold. "We believe in supporting diverse initiatives, of course, but this level of capital requires certain pedigrees." Now their pedigree was about to cost them everything. "Excuse me." A voice cracked behind her, tight with barely concealed panic. "You're not supposed to be back here." Jade turned slowly. A young man stood in the doorway leading to the main terrace, tall and lean with sandy brown hair that looked expensively disheveled. His navy suit probably cost more than most people's rent, but his dark eyes held something unexpected, genuine distress rather than entitled irritation. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, offering a small smile. "The crowd was overwhelming. I just needed a moment." Christopher Ashworth felt his chest tighten. He'd been watching her for 20 minutes through the floor-to-ceiling windows, this woman who moved through his family's party like a ghost, present but somehow separate from the circus of Manhattan elite air-kissing and networking around champagne flutes. "No, He stepped closer, running his hand through his hair. "I meant my family. They're not supposed to be." He gestured helplessly toward the main party. "You look like you could use a warning." Something in his tone made Jade study his face more carefully. Christopher's jaw clenched. He'd watched his mother Patricia and his sister Vivian circle like sharks the moment they'd spotted this woman, clearly not recognizing her from their usual social stratosphere. He'd seen that look before, the cold calculation that preceded what his family called sport. "They think you're—" he struggled with the words. "They think you don't belong here." "And you?" Jade asked, her voice soft, but her eyes sharp. "What do you think?" For a moment, Christopher forgot how to breathe. Up close, her presence was magnetic, not the desperate energy of social climbers he'd grown up around, but something deeper, confidence that didn't need to announce itself, intelligence that observed rather than performed. "I think," he said carefully, "that belonging has nothing to do with the size of your bank account or who your grandfather was." Before Jade could respond, the sound of heels clicking against marble announced the arrival of exactly who Christopher had been trying to protect her from. "Christopher, darling, there you are." Patricia Ashworth's voice carried the particular tone reserved for correcting servants. She was a woman who had weaponized elegance, every silver hair perfectly placed, her champagne-colored gown worth more than some cars. "And who is this lovely person?" Behind her, Vivian Ashworth Pemberton appeared like a satellite, blonde and sharp-angled, her smile as genuine as cubic zirconia. "Yes, Christopher, aren't you going to introduce your new friend?" Jade felt the familiar cold settle in her stomach, the same feeling she'd carried through childhood foster homes, through state university classrooms, full of legacy admissions, through boardrooms where she was the only face that looked like hers. But she'd learned to transform that cold into something useful. "Jade Morrison," she said simply, extending her hand to Patricia. Patricia's handshake lasted exactly half a second. "Morrison? I don't believe I know any Morrisons. Are you perhaps someone's guest?" The word dripped with implication. "I received an invitation," Jade replied evenly. "How wonderful," Vivian chimed in, her voice honey-sweet. "What sort of work do you do, Jade? Something in service?" Christopher's face flushed. "Oh, I'm in acquisitions," Jade said, her smile never wavering. "How interesting," Patricia said, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Acquisitions for whom?" "Various clients. I help them identify undervalued assets." It wasn't a lie. She just hadn't mentioned that she was usually both the client and the asset. "Well," Patricia said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass, "I do hope you're enjoying our little gathering, though I suspect this might be quite different from what you're accustomed to." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Christopher opened his mouth to say something, but Jade caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Very different," she agreed quietly. "I don't usually see this much waste in one place." Vivian's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Waste? Waste? Oh, honey, this is what success looks like. Though I suppose that might be difficult to understand from your perspective." "You're right," Jade said, her voice soft as silk. "My perspective is quite different. I see opportunity where others see impossibility." Patricia's eyes narrowed. Something in this woman's composure was irritating her, like a song played just slightly off-key. "And what opportunities do you see here, Miss Morrison?" Jade looked around the terrace, taking in the gleaming marble, the imported fountains, the view of Central Park glittering below. When she looked back at Patricia, her smile was serene. "Change," she said simply. Before anyone could respond, a server appeared with a champagne tray. Patricia and Vivian each took a glass, but when the server turned to Jade, Patricia's voice cut through the moment. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Miss Morrison was just leaving." The dismissal was clear as a slap. Christopher stepped forward, his face burning with shame, but Jade placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying a strange, quiet certainty, "I think I'll stay a little longer." After all, her smile was soft, almost sad. "I'll see you Monday morning." She turned and walked back toward the main party, leaving the Ashworth family staring after her in confusion. Only Christopher remained behind, watching her disappear into the crowd with something that felt disturbingly like pride swelling in his chest. What none of them knew was that Monday morning, the Ashworth Investment Group would discover that their largest client, the anonymous hedge fund that controlled 60% of their assets, had a new face. And she was already planning their first meeting. The main ballroom sparkled like a constellation fallen to earth, 300 of Manhattan's elites swirling beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most homes. Jade moved through the crowd like water, invisible among the designer gowns and tailored suits, listening to conversations that revealed more than their speakers intended. She'd learned the art of strategic invisibility years ago, how to blend into backgrounds while absorbing every detail. Tonight, she cataloged faces, relationships, business alliances. Information was currency, and she was banking everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan Ashworth's voice boomed across the room as he took the microphone. At 25, he carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Thank you all for celebrating with the Ashworth family tonight." Jade positioned herself near the edge of the crowd, close enough to observe, far enough to remain unnoticed. She watched Christopher standing with his family, his jaw tight with some internal tension she couldn't quite read. As many of you know, Jonathan continued, the Ashworth Investment Group has had quite the year. We've exceeded every projection, secured landmark deals, and proven once again why legacy matters in this business. Polite applause rippled through the room. Jade's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her water glass. But tonight isn't just about business. Jonathan's smile turned predatory. It's about celebrating our values, family, tradition, and the importance of knowing where you belong. Something in his tone made the room's energy shift. Conversations quieted. Christopher felt ice forming in his stomach. Which brings me to an amusing little discovery. Jonathan's gaze swept the room and landed, with laser precision, on Jade. It seems we have a party crasher tonight. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Every head turned, 300 pairs of eyes, suddenly finding Jade standing alone near the terrace doors. The crowd parted around her as if she carried something contagious. Now, Jonathan's voice carried false joviality. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Perhaps someone's domestic help got confused about their invitation. Nervous laughter tittered through the crowd. Jade stood perfectly still, her spine straight as a sword, but Christopher could see her hands trembling slightly against her glass. Patricia Ashworth stepped forward, her smile sharp as winter. Jonathan, darling, I was just speaking with this young woman. Miss Morrison here claims she received an invitation. Her pause was theatrical, though she's been quite mysterious about exactly how. Morrison, Jonathan pretended to think. I don't recall any Morrisons on our guest list. Unless, his eyes gleamed with malicious entertainment. Oh, perhaps you're here with one of our servers? That would explain the confusion. The laughter was louder now, emboldened by the family's lead. Jade felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her throat, the same feeling from childhood when teachers assumed she was in the wrong classroom, from college when classmates questioned how she could afford textbooks, from every boardroom where her credentials were questioned before her proposals were even heard. But underneath the humiliation, something else was building, something cold and calculating and utterly ruthless. Actually, Vivian's voice cut through the murmur, sweet as poisoned honey. I think she mentioned she works in acquisitions? Perhaps she's here scouting for her employer? She turned to address the crowd directly, looking for silver to polish, maybe? The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual delivery. Christopher felt something snap inside his chest. He stepped forward, but his father's hand caught his arm. Let your brother handle this, Richard Ashworth murmured. It's good for the family image, shows we don't tolerate inappropriate behavior. Christopher stared at his father in horror. Inappropriate behavior? She's done nothing wrong. She doesn't belong here, son. Surely you can see that. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of prejudice? How did you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. On the makeshift stage, Jonathan was building to his crescendo. You know what I admire about this young lady? His voice projected across the silent room. The audacity, the sheer ambition of walking into a room where you so clearly don't belong and pretending you have a right to be here. Each word landed like a physical blow. Jade felt the walls of the ballroom pressing closer, felt the weight of 300 gazes like hands pushing her down, felt the echo of every rejection, every dismissal, every moment when someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't enough. But then something shifted. The girl who had once hidden in foster home closets was gone. The student who had eaten ramen for months to afford a single professional dress was gone. The entrepreneur who had begged for meetings in coffee shops was gone. In their place stood someone who had built an empire from nothing, who had learned to turn pain into power, who understood that the deepest victories came not from avoiding humiliation, but from transforming it into fuel. Jade set her water glass down on a nearby table with deliberate care. The small sound somehow carried in the vast silence. She stepped forward into the light, into the center of the circle that had formed around her. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You are right, Mr. Ashworth." She looked directly at Jonathan, then let her gaze move to Patricia, to Vivian, to Richard. "I don't belong here." Triumphant smiles began to spread across their faces. "I belong," she continued, her voice growing stronger, somewhere much higher. The smiles faltered. Jade reached into her small purse and withdrew a simple business card. She held it up, though from a distance no one could read what it said. "My name is Jade Morrison," she said, her voice now carrying the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "And as of 9 a.m. Monday morning, I will own controlling interest in Ashworth Investment Group." The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to have physical weight. "You see," Jade continued, her smile soft and terrible, "I've been acquiring undervalued assets for quite some time. And your company?" She looked directly at Jonathan, whose face had gone chalk white, "was remarkably undervalued." She tucked the card back into her purse and looked one last time around the room, at the frozen faces, the dropped champagne glasses, the dawning horror in the Ashworth family's eyes. "Thank you for a truly unforgettable evening," she said quietly. "I'll see you all Monday morning." She turned and walked toward the exit, her $50 dress flowing behind her like a royal train. The crowd parted before her as if she were carrying lightning. Behind her, the Ashworth family stood in ruins of their own making, while Christopher stared after her with something that felt dangerously like awe blooming in his chest. The empire had fallen before anyone realized it was under siege. The Ashworth penthouse felt like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Crystal champagne flutes lay abandoned on marble surfaces, lipstick-stained napkins scattered across Persian rugs, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume couldn't mask the smell of fear. Patricia Ashworth sat rigidly on the white leather sofa, her champagne-colored gown now looking more like armor that had failed to protect her. "It's impossible," she said, "for the 7th time in 10 minutes. That person cannot own our company." "Mother," Christopher's voice carried a warning, but she ignored it. "Some kind of con artist." Vivian paced behind the sofa, her heels clicking against hardwood like a countdown timer. "Did you see that dress? Target, probably. And that cheap purse? No one with real money dresses like that." Richard Ashworth stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at Central Park as if the answers might be written in the tree lines. "I'll call Morrison and Associates first thing Monday morning," he said, his voice strained. "Have them run a full background check. Find out who she really is, what her game is." "Her game?" Christopher's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Her game was letting you humiliate yourselves in front of 300 people. Patricia's head snapped toward her youngest son. "Don't you dare take that tone with us. We are the victims here." "Victims?" Christopher stared at his mother in disbelief. "She stood there while you treated her like garbage, and you think you're the victims? She didn't belong there." Jonathan's voice cracked with desperation. She was obviously some kind of opportunist, looking for a way to what? Christopher's voice rose. "To stand quietly in a corner drinking water while you performed your little circus act." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 20 stories below. Vivian stopped pacing. "You're defending her." It wasn't a question. Christopher felt the weight of 3 generations of Ashworth expectations pressing down on him, the same pressure that had shaped every decision of his life. family first. Family always. Family above everything else. I'm defending basic human decency, he said quietly. She's not family, Patricia's voice was ice cold. She's a threat. And if you can't see that, then perhaps your judgment has been compromised. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Christopher felt something fundamental shifting inside him, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. Meanwhile, 15 blocks south, Jade Morrison sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor, staring at legal documents that should have felt like victory. Her building was quiet at this hour, only security guards and cleaning crews moving through the hallways. The city sprawled below her windows, a galaxy of lights that usually made her feel powerful. Tonight, she felt hollow. She'd spent 3 years planning this moment. 3 years building the financial architecture to acquire Ashworth Investment Group piece by piece, using shell companies and international funds to hide her identity. She'd imagined this night 1,000 times. The moment when she revealed her power, when she watched their smug superiority crumble into dust. She hadn't expected it to feel so. Her phone buzzed. Her assistant's text was brief, media calling. Word is spreading. Do you want to comment? Jade set the phone down without responding. She'd anticipated this too. The financial press would have the story by morning. Mystery mogul acquires Ashworth investment in hostile takeover. Rags to riches billionaire reveals hidden empire. All true, all accurate, all missing the point entirely. She walked to her window and pressed her palm against the cool glass. Somewhere out there, Christopher Ashworth was probably defending her to his family. The thought should have felt like another victory. Instead, it felt like a complication she hadn't planned for. There had been something in his eyes tonight, not pity, not guilt, but recognition, as if he'd seen something in her that his family couldn't or wouldn't. Dangerous, she thought. Distracting. She had work to do. By Monday morning, she needed to be ready to walk into that boardroom as their new owner, not as the hurt girl in the Target dress who still remembered every cutting word. Her phone rang. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway. Miss Morrison? The voice was male, unfamiliar, professional. This is James Fletcher, from Fletcher & Associates. I represent the Ashworth family. Here we go, she thought. What can I do for you, Mr. Fletcher? I believe there may have been some misunderstanding tonight. My clients are prepared to discuss any concerns you might have about their business practices. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to resolve this amicably. Translation: please don't destroy us. We'll pay whatever it takes. There's no misunderstanding, Jade said quietly. Your clients made their position quite clear tonight. Miss Morrison, I think if you understood the full scope of what you're— Mr. Fletcher, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to command boardrooms full of men who looked just like him. Your clients had an opportunity tonight to show me who they really are. They took it. She hung up. Within an hour, her phone rang 6 more times. Financial advisors, crisis management firms, even a former colleague offering to act as an intermediary. Each call was the same, desperation disguised as diplomacy, panic wrapped in professional courtesy. She ignored them all. Back in the Ashworth penthouse, Christopher sat alone on the terrace where he'd first met Jade Morrison. The party debris had been cleared away, but he could still see her standing by the fountain, could still hear her voice saying those 5 words that had changed everything. I'll see you Monday morning. His family was inside making calls, pulling strings, activating networks built over generations. They were fighting for their lives using the only weapons they'd ever known: money, influence, and the casual cruelty of assumed superiority. But Christopher kept thinking about something else. The way Jade had smiled when Vivian called her dress cheap, not hurt, not angry. Amused. As if she'd been waiting for exactly that moment. As if she'd planned it all along. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Where are you? We need to discuss strategy." Christopher stared at the message for a long moment, then turned his phone face down on the marble table. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of his family's strategy. The war had begun, and he was no longer certain which side he belonged on. Monday morning arrived with the kind of October rain that turned Manhattan into a watercolor painting, all blurred edges and gray washes. Christopher stood outside the sleek glass tower that housed Morrison Enterprises, rain soaking through his wool coat as he stared up at floors that disappeared into low-hanging clouds. He'd spent the weekend researching Jade Morrison, and what he'd found had left him reeling. Not just wealthy, generationally wealthy. Her hedge fund managed over $40 billion in assets. Her foundation had quietly funded dozens of educational initiatives. She'd built an empire that made his family's fortune look like pocket change. And they'd treated her like a servant who'd wandered into the wrong room. The lobby was all marble and steel, designed to intimidate. Christopher approached the security desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I need to see Jade Morrison," he told the guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who looked him up and down with professional assessment. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, but Miss Morrison doesn't take unscheduled meetings." The guard's tone was polite but final. "If you'd like to schedule something, please." Christopher's voice cracked slightly. "Tell her Christopher Ashworth is here. Tell her I'm not here representing my family." Something in his tone must have registered, because the guard picked up his phone and spoke quietly for a moment. He hung up and studied Christopher with new interest. 42nd floor, he said, pressing a visitor's badge into Christopher's palm. "Express elevator." The ride up felt eternal. Christopher watched the numbers climb and tried to organize his thoughts, but everything kept circling back to the same question: what am I doing here? The elevator opened into a reception area that managed to be both luxurious and understated. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that made him feel like he was flying. A young man at the reception desk looked up as Christopher approached. "Mr. Ashworth, Miss Morrison is in conference room 3. Through those doors, third door on your right." Christopher walked down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's homes. When he reached the conference room, he paused outside the frosted glass door, seeing her silhouette inside. Last chance to walk away, he thought. Instead, he knocked. "Come in." Jade sat at the far end of a polished table that could seat 20, legal documents spread before her like battle plans. She'd traded Saturday night's Target dress for a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his car, but her eyes held the same quiet intensity he remembered. "Mr. Ashworth," her voice was professional, giving nothing away. "I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you." Christopher closed the door behind him and remained standing. "I needed to apologize." "For what?" She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You didn't do anything." "Exactly." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "I stood there and watched my family humiliate you, and I did nothing." "You tried to warn me." Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "That was more than most people would have done." "It wasn't enough." Christopher moved closer to the table but didn't sit. What they did was unforgivable. Jade was quiet for a long moment, watching rain streak down the windows. "Do you know why I came to that party, Mr. Ashworth?" "Christopher." "And no, I don't. I came because I wanted to see them. The people who had rejected my company 3 years ago without even reading my proposal. The people who decided I wasn't worth their time based on—" She gestured at herself. "Whatever assumptions they made." Christopher felt sick. "My family rejected your proposal?" "Your father, actually. Very politely, very professionally. He suggested I try somewhere more appropriate to my background. The words hit Christopher like a physical blow. He sank into the chair across from her, understanding flooding through him. "You've been planning this for 3 years." "I've been building this for 3 years," she corrected. The planning took much longer. Before Christopher could respond, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Jade's assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Morrison, we're experiencing a building-wide power outage. Maintenance says it could be several hours. The elevators are down, and with this storm..." Christopher looked out the window at what had become a full tempest, rain lashing against the glass so hard it sounded like machine gun fire. "Looks like you're stuck here," Jade said, though she didn't sound entirely displeased. "I should call your family." She raised an eyebrow. "To let them know you're consorting with the enemy?" Christopher's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. He glanced at the screen and saw 17 missed calls from various family members. "They know where I am," he said quietly, turning the phone face down on the table. "And they're not happy about it." "No, they're not." Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? How did you handle that difficult decision? Share your experience in the comments below. Jade walked to a small refrigerator built into the conference room's wall and retrieved 2 bottles of water. She set one in front of Christopher and sat back down, closer this time, only a few seats away. "So," she said, unscrewing her bottle cap, "are you here to negotiate? Try to convince me to show mercy?" "No." Christopher's answer surprised himself with its certainty. "I'm here because I can't stop thinking about Saturday night." "Which part?" Her tone was carefully neutral. "The part where you stood there and let them destroy themselves." Christopher met her eyes. "You knew exactly what they were going to do, didn't you?" A small smile played at the corners of Jade's mouth. "People usually show you who they really are if you give them enough opportunity. And now you know who we really are." "Do I?" She tilted her head, studying him. "You're here, aren't you? Against your family's wishes, probably against your own better judgment. That tells me something different about who you are." Outside, thunder crashed so loudly the windows shook. The storm was getting worse, and Christopher realized he might be trapped here for hours, alone with the woman who now owned his family's company. The woman his family saw as an enemy. The woman he couldn't stop thinking about. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher said, surprised by his own boldness. "You can ask." "Saturday night, when they said those things, you looked sad. Not angry, sad. Why?" Jade was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'd hoped they might be different. Despite everything, despite the evidence, I'd hoped that maybe people could surprise me." She looked directly at him. "But you did surprise me, Christopher. You're here." The way she said his name sent something warm and dangerous coursing through his chest. Outside, the storm raged, trapping them together in a space that suddenly felt much smaller and infinitely more complicated. Neither of them knew that by the time the power came back on, everything between them would have changed. The emergency lighting cast everything in soft shadows, turning the conference room into something intimate and otherworldly. Rain continued its assault against the windows, and Jade found herself studying Christopher's face in the dim red glow, noting the way he kept checking his phone, and then deliberately setting it aside. "They're worried about you," she observed. "They're worried about what I might say to you." Christopher's laugh was bitter. "My father texted me 18 times in the last hour. Each message basically a variation of 'remember where your loyalties lie.' And where do they lie?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, listening to thunder roll across the city. "I used to think I knew," he said finally. "Family first, always. That's what I was raised on." But Saturday night, he shook his head. "I've never been so ashamed to be an Ashworth." Jade felt something unexpected twist in her chest, not satisfaction, but something softer, more dangerous. "Tell me about your proposal," Christopher said suddenly. "The one my father rejected." "Why?" "Because I want to understand what we threw away." Jade was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made him lean forward. "Trauma-informed financial literacy programs for underserved communities," she said. "I wanted to create a pipeline, not charity, but genuine opportunity. Kids aging out of foster care, single mothers trying to build credit, formerly incarcerated individuals learning to manage money. Real education, real support, real change." Christopher felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's brilliant." "Your father called it social work masquerading as business." Jade's smile was sharp as broken glass. "He suggested I try the Clinton Foundation." "Jesus." Christopher ran his hands through his hair. "Jade, Do you know what it's like?" she interrupted, her voice still soft but carrying an edge he hadn't heard before. "To sit across from someone who looks at you and sees only limitations, only assumptions?" The red emergency lighting caught the pain in her eyes, and Christopher felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. "I was in foster care from age 6 to 18, Jade continued, her words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. 12 different homes, some good, some not. I learned early that people see what they expect to see. Poor black girl? Must be looking for a handout. Must be grateful for scraps." She stood and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. "I put myself through Columbia on scholarships and student loans, graduated summa cum laude with a double major in economics and computer science, built my first company before I was 25, sold it for 8 figures. But when I walked into your father's office," she turned back to Christopher, "I was still just that foster kid who didn't belong." Christopher felt like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, not the powerful businesswoman or the mysterious party guest, but the person underneath. Someone who had built an empire not just from nothing, but from active resistance to everything the world had told her she couldn't be. "Why did you tell me that?" he asked quietly. "Because you asked. And because," she hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her face, "because I think you might actually hear it." Thunder crashed overhead, and in the brief silence that followed, Christopher made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "I've never told anyone this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I hate my life." Jade turned to look at him fully, surprised by the raw honesty in his voice. "I hate the person I'm supposed to be," he continued, staring at his hands. "I hate the assumptions people make about me. I hate that my last name opens doors I didn't earn. I hate that I've spent 28 years being grateful for privileges I never asked for and terrified of losing them." He looked up at her, and in the red emergency lighting, his eyes looked haunted. "I graduated from Harvard because my grandfather donated a library. I have my job because my father owns the company. I live in a penthouse I didn't pay for and drive a car I didn't earn, and every day I wake up feeling like a fraud." "Christopher, do you know what I wanted to be when I was little?" His laugh was shaky. "A teacher. I wanted to teach history to middle school kids. But that's not what Ashworths do. We manage money. We acquire things. We preserve wealth." Jade moved back to the table, sitting closer to him now, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and warm that seemed to wrap around him. "What stopped you?" she asked gently. "Fear. he said simply. Fear of disappointing them, fear of losing their love, fear of finding out who I really am without all this. He gestured around them. What if I'm nothing without the Ashworth name? What if I'm just ordinary? Ordinary. Jade's voice carried something that might have been tenderness. Christopher, you came here today knowing it would cost you. You defended me to your family, knowing they would see it as betrayal. That's not ordinary. That's brave. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the soft red glow, and Christopher felt something he'd never experienced before. The sensation of being truly seen by another person. Not the air, not the disappointment, not the obligation, but him. Can I tell you something else? Jade said, her voice soft as silk. Anything. Saturday night, when your family was performing their little show? She leaned closer, and Christopher caught his breath. I kept watching you, the way you looked at them, like you were seeing them clearly for the first time. The way you looked at me, like you were trying to apologize with your eyes. She reached across the small space between them and touched his hand, just briefly, just enough to send electricity racing up his arm. That's when I knew you were different, she whispered. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their small pocket of emergency lighting, something new was being born between them, fragile and dangerous and utterly undeniable. Neither of them heard Christopher's phone buzzing with yet another frantic call from his family. Neither of them cared. The storm had settled into a steady rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in the last hour, the space between Jade and Christopher had shrunk to almost nothing. They sat facing each other now, knees nearly touching, speaking in voices barely above whispers, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Okay, but seriously, Christopher was saying, his eyes bright with laughter. You bought an entire investment firm because they were rude to you at a coffee meeting? Jade tried to maintain her composure, but a smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't just rude. The partner, this was before Ashworth, he literally asked me if I was sure I was in the right building, suggested I try the McDonald's down the street if I was looking for work. No, Christopher's jaw dropped. So I bought controlling interest in his firm, restructured it as a subsidiary of Morrison Enterprises, and now he reports to my former college roommate. Jade's smile was wicked. She sends me updates on his performance reviews. Christopher burst into laughter, real, unguarded laughter that transformed his entire face. That's the most brilliantly petty thing I've ever heard. I prefer strategically motivated, Jade said primly, then ruined the effect by grinning. You're terrifying, Christopher said, but his tone was admiring rather than afraid. Remind me never to underestimate you. Too late for that. They fell into comfortable silence, and Christopher found himself studying her face in the soft emergency lighting. She looked younger when she smiled, not the untouchable businesswoman from the news articles or the mysterious figure from Saturday night, but someone who might laugh at bad movies and steal French fries when she thought no one was looking. Can I ask you something personal? He said. Haven't you been doing that for the last 2 hours? More personal. Jade tilted her head. Curious. Go ahead. Do you ever get lonely? The question slipped out before he could stop it, more vulnerable than he'd intended. All that success, all that power, do you ever wish you had someone to share it with? Something flickered across Jade's face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. Every day, she said quietly. But sharing requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability, Christopher finished. Exactly. And vulnerability is dangerous when you've spent your whole life proving you're strong enough to survive anything. Christopher nodded slowly. I know what you mean, different reasons, but I've never had a relationship that wasn't somehow about the Ashworth name. Women who wanted access to our world, or our money, or our connections. I stopped trying to figure out who actually liked me. "That's why you've never married," Jade said. "It wasn't a question. How did you?" "I may have done some research on your family." At his expression, she laughed. "Very thorough research." Christopher James Ashworth, 28, Harvard MBA, never married, no serious relationships longer than 6 months. You volunteer with literacy programs in the Bronx, which your family doesn't know about, and you've been quietly donating to educational charities under a false name for 3 years. Christopher stared at her. "You know about the tutoring?" "I know about a lot of things." Her voice was soft. "Including the fact that you've been supporting the college fund of a girl named Maria Santos, whose mother cleans your family's offices." Heat flooded Christopher's face. How do you know that?" "Because I've been doing similar things for years, and I recognize the patterns. Anonymous donations, scholarship funds with very specific criteria." Jade leaned forward slightly. "You're not who your family thinks you are, Christopher. Neither are you." He met her eyes. "I've read about your foundation, the schools you've built, the programs you've funded. You could have bought a yacht with that money, or a private island. Instead, you chose to remember where I came from." Jade's voice was barely a whisper. "To make sure other kids don't have to claw their way up alone." The honesty in her voice made something ache in Christopher's chest. "You're extraordinary." "I'm stubborn," she corrected. "There's a difference." "No," Christopher said, his voice gaining certainty. "You're extraordinary. You turned pain into purpose. You took everything they said you couldn't be and became it anyway." For a moment, Jade looked genuinely stunned, as if no one had ever seen her that way before. As if she'd grown so used to being feared or envied that simple admiration caught her off guard. "Christopher," she started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "What?" "This," she gestured between them, "this connection we're building, it's dangerous." "Why?" "Because tomorrow morning I'm still going to own your family's company. Tomorrow you're still going to have to choose between them and—" She trailed off. "And you," Christopher finished quietly. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and peril. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, and they both knew their time in this bubble was running out. "What if I don't want to choose them?" Christopher asked, his voice so soft she almost didn't hear him. Jade felt her heart skip. "Christopher, what if I want to choose you?" Before she could respond, the lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness was jarring after hours of intimate dimness, and they both blinked, momentarily disoriented. The spell was broken, but not destroyed. If anything, seeing each other clearly now, really seeing each other, made the connection feel more real, not less. Christopher's phone immediately exploded with notifications. Calls, texts, voicemails, all from his family demanding to know where he was, what he was doing, whether he'd lost his mind. Jade watched his face change as he scrolled through the messages, watched the weight of reality settle back onto his shoulders. Have you ever felt torn between following your heart and meeting family expectations? What did you choose, and do you regret it? Share your story in the comments. Others might need to hear it. "I should go," he said, but he made no move to leave. "Yes," Jade agreed, but she didn't want him to. They looked at each other across the conference table, both knowing that the moment they stepped outside this room, everything would change. The real world was waiting with all its complications, expectations, and consequences. But for now, for just a few more seconds, they had this. "Jade." Christopher's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes? Thank you for letting me see you, the real you." She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Thank you for being worth seeing." Neither of them knew that Christopher's sister Vivian was already in the lobby downstairs, armed with photographers and a story that would destroy everything they'd built between them. The calm before the storm was ending. The elevator descended in silence, 42 floors of Christopher trying to hold on to the warmth of the last few hours while reality crashed back over him like ice water. His phone had finally stopped buzzing, which somehow felt more ominous than the constant notifications. "Thank you," he said, as the doors opened into the lobby. "For today, for letting me—" Christopher. Jade's voice was strange, tight with something he couldn't identify. He followed her gaze across the marble expanse and felt his stomach drop. Vivian stood near the security desk, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the storm, flanked by two men with expensive cameras. She spotted them immediately and smiled, the same smile she'd worn Saturday night while delivering her cruelest lines. "Christopher!" Her voice carried across the lobby like a performance. "There you are! We've been so worried." The photographer's cameras started clicking immediately, rapid-fire flashes that turned the lobby into a strobe light. Christopher instinctively stepped closer to Jade, but she moved away from him, her expression shuddering closed. "Miss Morrison," Vivian called out sweetly, "thank you so much for hosting my brother today. I hope he was able to accomplish everything our family sent him to do." The words hit like a physical blow. Christopher felt the blood drain from his face as he saw understanding dawn in Jade's eyes, cold, terrible understanding. "What?" Jade's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the suddenly quiet lobby. "Oh!" Vivian's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Did he not tell you? How silly of him. Christopher, you forgot to mention that this was Daddy's idea, didn't you?" More camera flashes. Security guards were moving now, but the damage was being done in real time, each word a carefully placed knife. "You see, Miss Morrison," Vivian continued, her voice projecting perfectly for the cameras, "we thought it might be helpful to send someone you might actually trust, someone who could connect with you, find out what you really want, what might convince you to be reasonable about this whole situation." Christopher tried to speak, but no words came. He could only watch as everything he'd built with Jade crumbled to ash. "It was quite clever, really," Vivian was saying. "Christopher has always been good at making people feel special, making them believe he actually cares about them. It's a gift." "Stop." Christopher's voice finally broke free, rough with desperation. "Vivian, stop. That's not." "Oh, but it is." Vivian turned to him with mock surprise. "Don't be modest, darling. You did exactly what we hoped. Got close to her, gained her trust, found out what makes her tick." She looked back at Jade with venomous sweetness. "I hope he was convincing. He's had lots of practice." The lobby was dead silent, except for the soft whir of camera motors. Jade stood perfectly still, but Christopher could see the walls going back up behind her eyes, could see her retreating into the armor that had protected her through 12 foster homes and 1,000 rejections. "Jade," he said, his voice breaking on her name, "please, you have to know that's not—" "What I know," Jade said, her voice returning to the cool professional tone from Saturday night, "is that I've been a fool." Each word landed like a blow. Christopher stepped toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Did your family send you?" she asked. And her composure was so perfect, it was terrifying. "No. I swear to you, they didn't." "Did they know you were coming here?" Christopher hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. "Yes, but—" "Did they tell you to gain my trust? To find out what I wanted?" "Jade, please. Answer the question, Christopher." The cameras kept clicking. Vivian watched with satisfaction. Security was trying to move the photographers back, but they had what they came for. They suggested that someone should try to reason with you," Christopher said desperately. "But I didn't come here for them. I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you, because what they did was wrong, and I—" How convenient. Jade's voice was ice cold now, that your personal crisis of conscience aligned so perfectly with your family's needs. That's not what happened. Isn't it? She looked at him with eyes that had gone completely blank. Tell me, Christopher, which part was real? The vulnerability? The shared confessions? The moment when you asked if I ever got lonely? Every word she'd shared, every moment of openness, was being weaponized against itself. Christopher felt like he was watching someone bleed out and being powerless to stop it. All of it, he said, his voice raw. Every second was real. Jade, you have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. She straightened her jacket, every inch the untouchable CEO again. I've survived this long by trusting actions, not words, and your actions speak quite clearly. She started toward the exit, but Christopher caught her arm. Don't touch me. Her voice was so cold it could have frozen blood. He dropped his hand like he'd been burned. Jade, please, give me a chance to explain. Explain what? That you're exactly who your family raised you to be. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Congratulations, Christopher. Mission accomplished. You got closer to me than anyone has in years. I hope it was worth it. She walked toward the exit with perfect composure, but Christopher could see the slight tremor in her hands, could see the way she held herself too rigidly, as if one wrong move would shatter her completely. This isn't over, he called after her desperately. Jade paused at the revolving door and looked back at him one last time. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every disappointment she'd ever endured. Yes, it is. She disappeared into the storm, leaving Christopher standing in the wreckage of the best thing that had ever happened to him, surrounded by camera flashes and his sister's triumphant smile. Well, Vivian said brightly, that went perfectly. Daddy will be so pleased. Christopher looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in his life felt something approaching hatred for his own blood. Outside, the storm was ending. Inside, his world had just collapsed. The war between the families had claimed its first casualty, the only real love either of them had ever known. Christopher sat in his childhood bedroom at 3 in the morning, staring at his laptop screen where the story had already exploded across social media. Ashworth heir's secret mission topped every gossip blog. Billionaire heiress humiliated by undercover romance was trending on Twitter. The photos from the lobby were everywhere, him reaching for Jade's arm, her face a mask of betrayal, Vivian's triumphant smile. Each headline felt like a knife twisting deeper. His phone buzzed. Another text from his father: emergency family meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll discuss damage control and next steps. Next steps. As if Jade was a business problem to be solved, not a human being whose trust they'd systematically destroyed. Christopher deleted the message without responding and pulled up Jade's company website instead. Her official photo stared back at him, professional, untouchable, giving nothing away. But he could see past the armor now. He'd seen her real smile, heard her laugh, watched her walls come down in the red emergency lighting of that conference room. Before he could lose his nerve, he opened his laptop and started typing. Across town, Jade stood in her penthouse, looking out at a city that glittered like scattered diamonds. She'd been standing there for hours, still in the same suit from this afternoon, unable to bring herself to move. Her phone had been buzzing constantly. Reporters, business associates, friends offering support or asking for details. She'd ignored them all. He's had lots of practice. Vivian's voice echoed in her memory, making people feel special, making them believe he actually cares about them. Jade pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She'd survived foster care by learning to read people, to spot the difference between genuine kindness and manipulation. How had she missed this? How had she let herself believe that Christopher Ashworth, heir to a family that had treated her like garbage, might actually be different? Her laptop chimed with an email notification. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. The sender was Christopher Ashworth. The subject line was simple, "Please read this." Jade stared at the screen for a long moment, her finger hovering over the delete button. Everything rational told her to erase it, block his number, cut all ties. She'd rebuilt her life before. She could do it again. Instead, she opened the email. "Jade, I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I'm going to try anyway because losing you feels like losing the only real thing I've ever had. You asked me if my family sent me to your office. The truth is complicated. They wanted someone to reach out to you. Yes, they suggested I might be able to reason with you, but I didn't go there for them. I went because I couldn't stop thinking about Saturday night, not about the business deal, but about you, about the way you stood there with such dignity while they tore you apart, about the sadness in your eyes that I recognized because I carry it too. Every word I said to you today was true. Every moment we shared was real. When I told you about hating my life, about wanting to be a teacher, about feeling like a fraud, that wasn't strategy. That was me, probably for the first time in my adult life. I know how this looks. I know what Vivian made it seem like, but I'm attaching something that might help you understand where I really stand. Tomorrow morning my family expects me at a meeting to discuss damage control. Instead, I'll be holding a press conference. I've prepared a statement that will be sent to every major news outlet at 9 a.m. I can't take back what happened in that lobby, but I can make sure the world knows exactly who the Ashworth family really is and exactly where I stand. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I just need you to know that you weren't wrong about me. The man who sat with you in that conference room, who told you about his dreams, who saw you for exactly who you are, that's who I really am. That's who I choose to be. Christopher. P.S. I've also attached the resignation letter I'm submitting to the Ashworth Investment Group board tomorrow morning. Some choices can't be halfway. Jade's hands trembled as she opened the first attachment. It was a press statement, raw and unflinching. Yesterday, my family orchestrated a cruel and calculating attack on Jade Morrison, a brilliant businesswoman whose only crime was succeeding despite our prejudices. The photos you've seen tell only part of the story. The full truth is that my family has spent years rejecting people like Miss Morrison based on assumptions rooted in bigotry and entitlement. I went to see Miss Morrison not as their representative, but as someone who was ashamed of what we had done. What happened between us was real, honest, and entirely my choice. Her trust was not a prize to be won for my family's benefit. It was a gift I didn't deserve and apparently wasn't worthy of protecting. Effective immediately, I am resigning from all positions within Ashworth Investment Group and severing my financial ties to my family. Some principles are worth more than inheritance. I cannot speak for Miss Morrison's intentions regarding our company, but I can say this: whatever she decides, we will have earned it. The resignation letter was equally devastating, a complete renunciation of everything the Ashworth name had given him. Jade sank into her desk chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was giving up everything. His job, his inheritance, his family, all of it, for her, for the truth, for love. Her phone rang, startling her. Christopher's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it, her finger hovering over the answer button. This was the moment. The choice between safety and vulnerability, between walls and bridges, between the life she'd built alone and the possibility of something more. The phone kept ringing. Jade closed her eyes, took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff, and answered. "Hello, Christopher." His voice was soft, uncertain, full of hope he was trying desperately to contain. "Thank you for reading it. Thank you for writing it." She paused. "Are you really going to send it?" "I already did. It goes out in 4 hours. You'll lose everything." "I already lost everything," he said quietly. "The moment you walked out of that lobby, I lost the only thing that mattered." Jade felt tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed finally spilling down her cheeks. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said quickly. "I know I can't take back what happened, but if there's any part of you that believes what we had was real—" "It was real," she whispered. The silence that followed was full of possibility and terrifying hope. "What happens now?" Christopher asked. Jade looked out at the city, at all the lights that represented lives and dreams and second chances. "Now," she said, her voice stronger, "we find out if love really is worth the risk." The Ashworth family conference room had never felt so much like a tomb. At exactly 9:01 a.m., Richard Ashworth's phone buzzed with the first news alert, then Patricia's, then Vivian's, then Jonathan's. By 9:05, every major news outlet in the country was running Christopher's statement. "He destroyed us," Vivian whispered, staring at her phone screen in horror. "He actually destroyed us." Patricia sat frozen, her usually perfect composure cracking like ice. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. CNN, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, they all want statements. "Damage control," Richard said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "We can spin this, paint him as unstable, emotional." With what credibility? Jonathan's laugh was bitter. "He just told the entire world exactly who we are. And the worst part is, he's not wrong." On the 42nd floor of Morrison Enterprises, Jade watched the news coverage with something between admiration and terror. Christopher's press conference was airing live on every business channel, and he looked simultaneously terrified and absolutely certain. "I've spent my entire life benefiting from a system that judges people by their backgrounds rather than their abilities," he was saying, his voice steady, despite the cameras. "Yesterday, that system cost me the most important relationship of my life. Today, it costs me everything else." A reporter shouted a question. "Mr. Ashworth, are you saying this is all about a romantic relationship?" Christopher paused, and for a moment, Jade saw the vulnerability he'd shown her in the conference room. "I'm saying this is about choosing who you want to be when it matters," he said quietly. "I'm saying some people are worth changing everything for." The camera zoomed in on his face as he continued, "Jade Morrison is the most extraordinary person I've ever met. She's brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than anyone should have to be. If she never speaks to me again, I'll understand. But the world should know that my family's treatment of her was unforgivable and that she has my complete support in whatever she decides to do with our company." Jade felt her breath catch. He was doing it, really doing it. Burning every bridge for her. Her assistant knocked and entered. "Miss Morrison, there's someone here to see you." Jade turned, expecting another reporter, and found Christopher standing in her doorway. He looked exhausted, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie slightly crooked, but his eyes held the same quiet determination she'd fallen for. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she gestured for her assistant to close the door. "I watched your press conference. And you're completely insane." But she was smiling as she said it. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I told the truth." Christopher stepped into the room but kept his distance, as if he wasn't sure of his welcome. "About them. About me. About you. About us?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been through in the last 48 hours. Christopher took a breath that seemed to come from his soul. "Jade, I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know what it looked like, how Vivian made it seem, but I need you to know that every moment we shared was real. When I told you I was falling for you—" "When did you tell me you were falling for me?" Jade interrupted, her heart suddenly racing. Christopher's face flushed. I didn't. Not out loud. But I was. I am. I'm completely, utterly, ridiculously in love with you, and I know that's probably the worst possible timing, but Jade crossed the room in 3 quick steps and kissed him. It was soft and desperate and tasted like second chances. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Christopher rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you forgive me?" he whispered. "This means I believe you," she whispered back. "This means I'm tired of protecting myself from everything good that might happen. What about your company? What you plan to do to my family?" Jade was quiet for a moment, then stepped back to look at him properly. "What would you do if you were me?" Christopher considered this seriously. "I'd show mercy, not because they deserve it, but because you're better than they are. And because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's success. And if I don't show mercy, then I'll support whatever you decide, because you've earned the right to choose." Jade felt something settle in her chest, a peace she hadn't known she was looking for. "I'm going to restructure the company," she said. "Keep the profitable divisions, sell the rest, use the proceeds to fund educational initiatives. Your family will keep their executive salaries but lose their voting rights." Christopher smiled slowly. "That's perfect. Justice without destruction." "There's one more thing." Jade moved to her desk and pulled out a document. "I'm offering you a position, head of educational outreach for the Morrison Foundation. It's not teaching middle school history, but it's a start." Christopher stared at the offer letter, then at her. "You're giving me a job? After everything?" "I'm giving you a chance to be who you really are," she corrected, "if you want it. What does it mean to you to choose love over fear? Have you ever had to risk everything for someone you believed in? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else to take that leap." Christopher set the letter aside and pulled her close. "I want it. I want you. I want a life where we build something beautiful together. Even if it means starting over? Even if it means your family may never forgive you. Especially then." Christopher's smile was radiant. "Do you know what you said to them Saturday night, right before you left?" "I said several things Saturday night." "You said, 'I'll see you Monday morning,' and then you walked away like you owned the world." Jade laughed. "Because I did own the world, their world anyway." "No," Christopher said, his voice soft with wonder. "You didn't own their world. You created a new one, a better one, and somehow, miraculously, you're letting me be part of it." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, full of promises and possibilities. When they finally broke apart, Jade was breathless and laughing. "So what happens now?" she asked. Christopher grinned and gestured toward the window, where Manhattan sprawled beneath them like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. "Now we change the world. Together." "Together," Jade repeated, and the word felt like coming home. Outside, the city hummed with endless possibility. In boardrooms across Manhattan, the old guard was scrambling to understand what had just happened. The Ashworth Empire was crumbling, being rebuilt into something unprecedented. But in the conference room on the 42nd floor, 2 people who had found each other across a divide that should have been unbridgeable were writing the first chapter of a love story that would reshape everything they touched. "I love you," Christopher said, the words carrying the weight of everything he'd given up and everything he'd gained. "I love you too," Jade replied, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what those words might cost her. Love, it turned out, was worth any price. Even billionaires, sometimes, got their fairy tale endings.
Christopher sacrifices everything for Jade, proving his love is real, and together they transform his family's company into a force for good while building their new life together. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.